we've heard from our panelists in their opening remarks. Now, one of the key challenges that actually has come out from the panel and also from the speaker is the challenge of actually good food environment. That's the buzzword that has come out. And from the discussion that came from Ruud, Abigail, he actually has also mentioned the very expensive healthy food. Now, you are working, and in your experience with the city networks, what are some of the nutrition interventions? What are the solutions that would actually be brought about from experiences to tailor the planning towards making sure that the needs of the urban dweller have access to healthy, but is convenient, is healthy, but it's not also not very expensive? You have 2 seconds.
2 seconds?
2 minutes.
I was thinking I got away there with 2 seconds on that question. I mean, I think the first thing to say on this is that actually the learning and experience from the kind of context that I typically focus on is still quite limited. We have tools that exist that help us to understand a bit more about the affordability of diets and to think through what that means in terms of the urban poor. There is very interesting research ongoing, including supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, trying to unpack how the urban poor access foods and the inaccessibility around unhealthy or healthy foods and unhealthy foods. And there is clearly some learning that we can take from high-income countries where we know that the way in which cities have been planned and policies around, for example, where retailers are positioned, are also incredibly important for thinking about how you can ensure more equitable access to healthy foods. Certainly in the city where I live, in London, we know that the urban poor also happen to live furthest away from places where healthy foods are available, let alone more affordable. And there is work ongoing to try and resolve some of those issues. But there is clearly a much wider set of conversations that need to take place about the broader food system and the linkages between rural production and urban context to look at what needs to happen to make healthy foods more affordable more generally. This is clearly a very particular challenge in urban settings, but it's not unique to urban settings. And so there's a wealth of thinking out there on how you address that balance and ensure that the foods that are going to drive good health outcomes and address all forms of malnutrition are more accessible to the poor. So there is a lot out there. Some of this is well documented, some of this is new learning, but it is something that I think we very definitely need to give much greater focus to, no matter where we live in the world.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. That's very, very useful. Ruud, you've actually have had an outcry of stakeholders that are missing here, and I think you've mentioned the retailers that needed to be here, people from the mayor office, the decision makers that needed to be here. And we've heard from our speaker, I think it came out very clear that the majority of people in the cities or urban areas eat out. What do you think would be the role of the chefs where we eat? What do we think would be the role of chefs? Because they're really an agent for change to ensure that they provide in the restaurants healthy food and that it's affordable. Because they're key stakeholders. They are very critical.
That's a nice question. I didn't look at MasterChef Africa, and I don't know who was the winner, but I think that's a very influential program. So it is an important question, and it's a question about institutional consumption. And institutional consumption in schools, in factories, in hospitals, and at conferences, for instance, should be healthy. And so that is an entrance to many of the habits at home as well. There is a discussion about whether school feeding and school meals, whether that spills over to household behavior, whether the mothers take up the same habits of healthier foods that are provided at schools at home. We don't know yet how that works, but that would be an interesting setting. So that's one part. But it's not sufficient. You have to also look at the design of supermarkets. Perhaps you can ban the availability of candies at the cashier outlets. That's the discussion we have in the Netherlands. Perhaps you could make healthier foods more at site and unhealthier foods more at the bottom or at the top. So there is a lot of discussion about the design of retail. And finally, I believe, but that's a little bit outside your question, but since the foods, sometimes imported foods, processed foods, is so much cheaper than locally produced food, and that has to do a lot with both trade policies and with infrastructure. Trade policies can be helpful to ban the import, for instance, or to reduce the import of some commodities that can be perfectly produced within the country. And dairy is one of those issues. Nigeria reduced the possibility for the industry to import processed dairy products in order to enhance local production. And secondly, let's say if we use the ICT tools that we have available for improving the efficiency of value chains of healthy foods, it's not so much an issue of production, it's an issue of value chain organization.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Both Min San and Palikon, you've talked about the win-win situation of linking rural-urban linkages in ensuring that actually we bring in all these delicious and diversified smart foods, in the future smart food, into the urban setting. Now, my question to you, Pin San, is that, do you have the same problem like we have in Africa, where you have a huge number of the poor urban in the bidonvilles, in the dwellings, where there's the poor are very poor, but still in the urban setting. So we call them bidonvilles. If that's the case, because they would also be relying so much on street food. How now do you ensure that the food that is going to be prepared in this type of setting is safe and healthy to the population? Because of the part of the environment. But you might not have the same situations in Africa, but we want to learn from you.
Thank you, Chair. When you see the organic food in city, the menu of organic food, you know, the high, very high, the price. But in the homestead or the naturally collected food prepared in the rear, the household, there's the free of the pesticide, free of the fertilizer. I mean the no pesticide. This is automatically the organic. So there is cheap. So when we can transport to we can ship those food or to those products to the city, the price can compete to the organic menu, the very good restaurant. Mm-hmm. So that I mean to the awareness first, to awareness the people who live in the city, the value of the neglected and underutilized species. Then we can make sure the market. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We want to know, actually, I think there's a huge, in terms of data. So either you can tackle this question, Parikone, or anybody, especially in your case on urban planning. How can we overcome the huge data gap for urban food security and nutrition? Because there has been experience in most of the reporting that there is a lack of data and data gap that would inform us on the challenges. But one of the keynote speakers, I think all of them touched on this important data that actually talks about the multiple burden of malnutrition, whether it's undernourishment and micronutrition and overweight and obesity. How can we overcome that? Do you have any experience in your country, or any one of you? And two, this is 1 minute question, because we have to wind up in 3 minutes.
Yeah, very interesting question, and the good question for this point. How overcome for the malnutrition, the food, for the urban area and rural area. Of course, the the government should have the good policy and how to prepare like open platform information for sharing. Now every farmer, they have the smartphone, smartphone, if compared with the 5 or 10 years. So for me, of course, I am the professor in the National University. I am teaching many faculty of law in the National University of Laos, Faculty of Agriculture, Social Science, Environment Science. So one thing for the library, but people don't like to read for the organic, like this, the brochure in the library. But for the smart information, important point for sharing with the own people, not just only the consumer, but farmer and the producer also. Yeah, that my overview and my idea.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now I'll ask each one of you for half a minute. Could you give a take home message, one sentence, a take home message. I'll start with you, Abigail. What would you say that should stick to the audience? What is it?
Well, I think it's probably a little bit like some of the take-home messages from other sessions here is that, I mean, first of all, we need to think about the multiplicity of nutrition challenges that we're dealing with in urban settings. And we also really need to think about how we're working very effectively with others, given the multiple drivers that really affect how nutrition plays out in urban contexts. But I think for me, certainly, again, in the areas where I work, my biggest take-home message is that we still really need to invest in understanding what works so that we can guide and advise policymakers on taking effective decisions in this area and investing their resources as wisely as possible. Given the nature of the challenge, that's incumbent on all of us sitting in the room and beyond to really equip decision makers with the best possible evidence on how to address this massive challenge that we are facing.
Okay. Thank you. Ruud?
Yeah, just one additional issue that has not been mentioned, but that deserves perhaps more attention. That's the circularity of food systems for urban areas. There is a lot of waste that we can recycle, and perhaps it's also already used by sometimes the poorer consumers, so the multiple outlets, but also circularity in terms of energy and in terms of water. And just one example. Our horticultural sector in the Netherlands, we are the second exporter of horticultural products in the world, used to be a net user of energy. Now it's a net producer of energy, and it is serving the heating of another city. So we can make systems circular and then make them also more efficient.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Sam?
Thank you. I want to say again, the neglected and underutilized species, but they have the high value, so in reality is not neglected. So the FAO already say the neglected species. That's also I want to say like this: neglected species are future smart food. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, for my short, is okay, fine?
Yes.
I can. Yeah,
one second, yeah.
Yeah. So for my short talk, of course, the important for the nose, how to promote for the zero hunger, especially not just only for our generation, but for the next future generation, like by ourselves, by me, I and my family, I grow and my wife cooking. And we are eating together, or we are living in the city, right? So that mentioned have some my friend give some key message like we are what we eat. There, please remember and to tell your children and your grandchildren. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So we are what we eat. I just want to wind up. We are what we eat. And we know that if we are going to neglect the cities, we know that we are not going to actually achieve zero hunger, because the multiple burden of all forms of malnutrition are very evident in the city. And so it is important that we focus. How, first of all, we know, we've heard from here, town planners, local governments, mayors should make sure that at the center of their planning, there's food systems for healthy diet, and make sure that the food system that produce healthy diet, the healthy diet that is affordable, is accessible. How do we do that? Bring in multi-stakeholders, the platform multi-stakeholders. And through this, the retailers who are the private sector, bring in all other stakeholders and come up with a governance mechanism that is actually going to ensure accountability for healthy diets. But of course, to do this, to be able to ensure that also the rural populations are going to benefit, the rural-urban linkages should actually hold. How do we do this? As of now, let's start learning lessons from others through the networks. With these few remarks, allow me to ask you to give an applaud of hand to our distinguished panelists who actually have really done a great job to inform us of what is happening.